If you're a crime junkie, then I know you've heard Amanda's story before. And I'm sure you have formed your own opinion on who she is and whether or not she's innocent, regardless of how the courts have ruled. And again, I have my own opinions on the matter, and I think she's innocent.
And I agree, but I see why people might still have questions about things, especially if they're just going off the headlines and haven't, really dug into this case on their own. It's really easy to believe that prevailing narrative, that prosecution's narrative.
Which became the media's narrative too, and the version of events we all came to understand as fact while this whole thing was unfolding, but it wasn't fact. So many of this, things that we think we know, just aren't fact.
Right. And I mean, like you said, we get questions about this all the time. And I know that something that comes up a ton is, how could anyone walk into that flat that morning to find the door, fully blown open, blood in the sink, and this unflushed toilet and be like, this is fine, everything's fine.
Right? People have questions from the very moment this story starts. And that's actually a question that I asked Amanda directly.
I think that hindsight is 20/20. Everyone thinks that now that we know that there was a crime scene there, of course I would have reacted this way or that way. But I did not know that there was a crime scene to be discovered when I came home that day. I thought I was going on a trip to eat some truffles that day. And in the meantime, I'm not a true crime person. I was not that person. I didn't read those novels. And so that really was the furthest thing from my mind.
We do have the benefit of hindsight, and you never think that the worst can happen or is literally happening to you in that moment or to someone that you know. And I know at least, I think everyone, we try to write stuff off all the time because it's not even in our realm of reality that it could happen until it actually is happening.
And the fact of the matter is, Amanda did know something wasn't right. I mean, she told me that as soon as she saw that unflushed toilet, she knew. And she bolted out of the apartment, almost immediately started calling police, her mom, her roommates, looking for somebody to help her process what she'd seen and either validate the bad vibes or talk her off the ledge. Because like you just said, we're looking for that excuse, someone to say oh, you're overreacting, because bad stuff happens on TV or in podcasts, but not to me. And Amanda was so young at the time, too. Young, and also let's not forget, in a foreign country where everyone around her spoke a language she was there to learn.
Right.
And when I was talking to her, she talked about that, too. And for her, the chaos really began after she got back to the flat, and then they kicked down the door and discovered Meredith's body.
Philomena and her boyfriend were there alongside the cops trying to break down Meredith's door. And when they do, Philomena screams, loses her mind. I don't know what she's saying. I hear a foot. I don't know what she's talking about. I think maybe she saw a foot. She's clearly in distress. Is there a severed foot in there? What is going on? The cops immediately say, get out of the house. And so we all scuffle out of the house, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on because everyone is suddenly talking in very rapid Italian. I'm looking to Raffaele for help to understand what's going on. And what I'm able to glean in those first immediate seconds is that there is a body in Meredith's room. At first, I thought they were saying that she was in the closet, that there was a body in the closet. And what I think they were saying now is that her body was covered by a blanket so that you couldn't see her body, but there was blood that was on her closet doors or something like that. But at the time, I was confused. I had no idea what they were saying. I thought someone had found a body in a closet. And so I'm sitting there going, is that Meredith? Is that someone else? What's going on? No one's telling me anything. Philomena's hysterical. I'm mostly in shock because I've not seen what anyone's seeing, and I'm not sure what anyone's talking about. I do know that I'm scared, and I'm scared for Meredith, and I'm scared for thinking, oh my gosh, what could have happened if I had been home? Could I be stuffed in a closet somewhere? So it was a very confusing time.
And that confusion didn't stop either, not for a long time. Amanda knew she was going to be questioned by police.
Right, I mean, she's not just the roommate, she's also the person who discovered the crime scene.
Right, and she and Meredith hadn't known each other that long, 6 weeks or so, but they were friends, and Amanda just wanted to help. She was willing to do whatever she could to help police solve this thing and get the killer off the streets.
honestly, the only thing I thought was, I guess I'm gonna talk to the police and tell them everything I know, which was very little. I couldn't imagine who could have done this. Even as I was spending those next few days in the police office, no experience whatsoever dealing with police, no understanding of what I should expect and how I should be treated. I just went along and did what people told me to do, which was show up day after day for hours on end to rehash the same questions over and over again, and to do so without an interpreter. There were times that there was someone here or there who could speak some English, but for the vast majority of the time, I was being asked to respond to questions in Italian by Italian speakers who were much older than me and authority figures. Meanwhile, I can talk about as well as maybe a 10-year-old, but of course, I have very limited vocabulary, and again, I'm not reading true crime novels in Italian. I'm reading Harry Potter novels in Italian. So I can tell you, the word for muggle, but I can't tell you the word for crime scene. It was definitely a struggle, particularly because they would always isolate me when they were questioning me. It wasn't like Raffaele could be there and be my interpreter, and often I would rely on him to tell me what was going on. Basically, what they were telling me this entire time, and they were building it up over the course of the days, was that I was an important witness for them, that I was the closest person to Meredith, that I must know something, I must know somebody who wanted to hurt her. And again, I repeated to them over and over again, no, I don't know anyone who would want to hurt Meredith. There are some, shady characters around town, shady in the sense that, like, they might try to give you a drink too many and take you home kind of thing, but not like a murderer.
Now, they may have been telling her she was an important witness, but by this time, she was a lot more than that in their minds. She had become their main suspect, though even at its worst, the fact that she was being considered a suspect never even registered with Amanda.
They never accused me necessarily of anything. Like, even when it was at its worst, like the final interrogation when I was being questioned in the middle of the night for hours on end and I got slapped and I was being yelled at, none of them accused me of the crime. They accused me of knowing something, of knowing who had committed the crime and not telling them. So I told them the same things over and over again, and finally they spent the final evening yelling at me, telling me that no, in fact, I had likely witnessed this murder, that I had amnesia because I was traumatized, and that if I didn't remember, they kept telling me, remember. You need to remember, or else you're never going to see your family again. You need to remember, or you're on the side of the killer. Like, it was this insane accusation, as if I was purposefully not remembering, but then they were also suggesting to me that I had amnesia and that if they yelled at me enough, then maybe I would remember. It was very, very scary and intimidating. And they suggested to me things like, they took my cell phone and they said, hey, you have this text message exchange with this person named Patrick. Who's Patrick? Where did you meet with him that night? It says that you met with him that night. Was he the one who did it? Who is Patrick? Did he go home with you? And over the course of many hours of this kind of questioning, I started to think that I maybe did have amnesia. I started to think, well, I have all the memories of being with Raffaele that night, but maybe those are rewritten memories that I'm trying to, maybe my mind doesn't want to remember that I witnessed a murder. Maybe that's the only reason why these cops are yelling at me.
By the way, the Patrick she's referring to here is Patrick Lumumba. He was Amanda's boss who came up in this quote-unquote confession because police wanted her to explain why she had texted him and said that she would see him later that night. So if you're not familiar, basically the story goes that Amanda was supposed to work that night. He didn't need her. So she's like, cool, see you later, which to us as Americans is like, bye. But I guess in Italian, it has like a very literal translation to, I'm going to meet up with you later. So the police were like pushing her to explain him in this like rewritten memory. So she implicated him early on as being involved in the murder, basically saying that she was there and saw Patrick kill Meredith. But when they find Rudy's DNA, this whole thing kind of like fell apart. And eventually he just drops out of the story and kind of gets like swapped for Rudy without much explanation. And this is yet another one of those points in Amanda's story where I think a lot of people get so caught up. It's like, but she confessed. Innocent people don't confess. Like, how could this happen? But the confession doesn't even make sense when you know the real story.
Right, and we've talked about shady interrogation techniques and coerced confessions before. And I think it's incredibly easy for us to sit where we are now and say, I'd never in a million years say something that wasn't true. I'd never confess to a crime that I didn't commit. But just like we have no idea how we might react coming home to the apartment on the day that Meredith's body was discovered, we also have no idea how we might react to an interrogation room under those circumstances.
And under that kind of pressure.
We're talking a different country, a legal system you aren't familiar with, a language you're not familiar with, on top of being young and scared, and your friend just got murdered.
And on the other side of the table are trained professionals. They know all the tricks and techniques to get people talking. And whether or not those techniques are above board or not, like, that's a whole nother discussion.
I started to think that they must be right and I must be wrong. And I started to try to do what they asked me to do, which was remember. And ultimately what that ended up looking like for me was in a haze of exhaustion and under coercive pressure, I tried to imagine what could have happened that night. And what I was able to come up with was just a confused jumble of images that were patchwork memories that I was trying to stitch together into some kind of coherent vision that they had proposed that involved Patrick. And finally, they wrote it all down, they stitched it all together, and had me sign it, and then went off to arrest my boss, Patrick Lumumba. And as soon as they stopped yelling at me, as soon as they gave me a break to like just sit in my chair quietly and breathe for a second, I realized that this was not a memory. This was not something that I was remembering. This was wrong. And I told them so. And they said, don't worry, your memories will come back. They just wouldn't hear it. And they wouldn't hear it so much that I even asked for a piece of paper to write it down because I knew that they weren't listening to me. And I thought, like, if I write it down, maybe they'll listen to me. But of course, I have horrible Italian. And so I do my best to explain, I know I said these things. I know I said that I remembered something, but I don't remember something. I cannot go up in court and say, I remembered that Patrick did this. And they took that piece of paper. I don't know what they did with it, but they said, again, they just reiterated, you have amnesia, and with time, your memories will come back. I'm convinced that they brought me in that night, that final night for questioning, because they had tapped my phone. They knew that my mom was coming, that she was arriving the very next morning. And I think they thought, this is our last chance to get Amanda when she's truly vulnerable. And then they put handcuffs on me, told me that they were taking me someplace safe for my protection, that they had to put the handcuffs on me. It was a formality, and that I would see my mom soon.
By the way, that someplace safe was prison.
What? What a complete shock to the system. Like,
Yeah.
You think you're going somewhere for your own safety, like a safe house or something, but you're actually being arrested for murder?
Well, here's the kicker. Even as she is being put in prison, she didn't wholly understand why. She didn't know she was being accused directly of murder until later. Get this.
They took me to prison, and the next time I saw those same police officers was when I was brought in front of a judge and finally told days later that I was accused of being involved in this crime. I did not know. It wasn't even like they brought me to court. They brought me to a different part of the prison and told me that I was finally going to see a lawyer for the first time. So the first time I ever encountered my lawyer was walking into this room with a judge and the same cops and the same prosecutor who had been interrogating me and my lawyer. And